Hi, welcome everybody. This is the final discussion session for Warheads to Windmills, our book discussion. I am part of the Rachel Corrie Foundation, and I will also the liaison to the Olympia Coalition to abolish nuclear weapons. I will turn it over to Joanne, who is also a member of that and can talk more about what we're talking about today.
Hey, thank you very much. And just a moment of recognition, the man who actually formed the Olympia Coalition passed on about 2 weeks ago. So we want to honor him because he's the reason that Bill and I and Jim got to know each other. So that's just I just wanted to designate that. But anyway, we have someone with us who, again, is like Glenn, who founded the OCAM, is another peacemaker. Listen to this. He happens to be the executive director of an organization called Nuclear Ban US, and is the national coordinator of the Warheads to Windmills Coalition. So we could consider ourselves a possible member of that coalition if that's one of the things that we can decide to do. He has spent his life teaching, writing, directing organizations, and campaigning on peace and environmental issues in colleges, war zones, and governments around the world. He holds a PhD in peace studies from Bradford University. Tim, where's Bradford?
In England, in Yorkshire.
Okay, in Yorkshire, thank you. And he has served as executive director of Nonviolent Peace Force. He directed peace-building projects in the countries of Colombia, Northern Ireland, Kosovo, Chechnya, Croatia, Sri Lanka, and many other places. He has also served as the editor of Peace News, as director of the National Peace Council in the United Kingdom, as international secretary of Peace Brigades International, and was founder and director of Peace Workers UK. He is the author of Disarming the Nuclear Argument, The Truth About Nuclear Weapons, and several different variations of Warheads to Windmills. And this one that we are reading is the one that includes Preventing Climate Catastrophe and Nuclear War. He is also, for those of you who are familiar with ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, I think he's one of the members that helped get that treaty started, among other things. This man is a true peacemaker, and we're extremely honored that he is joining us today. So with that, Dr. Wallace, I would like to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Joanne, and great to meet you all. I see there's a very strong Presbyterian presence here. I studied theology at Aberdeen University, which was Presbyterian, although I'm Quaker. I have never worked in Palestine, but I have worked with a number of organizations that have been in Palestine, including EAPI. I don't know if you're familiar with the Ecumenical Accompaniment Project for Palestine and Israel, and many other organizations that were based there. You know, I don't remember which one Rachel Corrie was in. I think International Solidarity Movement or one of those. But anyway, there's been lots of organizations doing this kind of work to try to stop the violence and protect civilians in war zones, and I've been very active in that. But this is about nuclear weapons and climate, so I do have some slides. Joanne asked me to sort of give an overview of the last section of the book, so I'll do that. If I can find, let's see. So sharing my screen. I hope you can all see that. I understand you've had a session on climate and a session on nuclear weapons. So what I want to do is just reiterate how these two issues are connected. And first and foremost, they are both existential threats to all of us, to the entire planet. We know how serious these are potentially. One could end human civilization in a matter of minutes. The other one will take a bit longer, but they're both serious threats. And we know that we've got to address them at the scale that an existential threat requires, and with the urgency that it requires. We've been told over and over again, we have until 2030 to make drastic cuts in our carbon emissions, and we're still not there, and it's now more than halfway through 2024, and the same with nuclear weapons. I mean, the situation has been getting steadily worse and more dangerous, and we're just sleepwalking into this nuclear danger. So we know what has to be done in both cases. Somebody's got a sound going there. We know what has to be done. In the case of nuclear weapons, we've got to get rid of them. I mean, um, there is no solution to preventing to eliminating the threat of nuclear war without getting rid of the weapons that are threatening us. And same with climate, we know it has to be done. We have to stop burning fossil fuels. That's 86% of all carbon emissions come from burning fossil fuels, and we've got to stop doing it. And we know there are many alternatives out there, and we've got to just work on them. It's beyond the point in both cases where we can rely on baby steps and halfway measures and all the things that are in the book that look at ways we've tried to address these two issues, short of actually getting rid of nuclear weapons and fossil fuels. So they both require laws, regulations, and ultimately treaties. We have a treaty, as you know, on nuclear weapons, which is our most important tool right now. We don't yet have a treaty banning fossil fuels, as you probably discussed in your book club. The Paris Agreement doesn't even mention fossil fuels. There's all kinds of things going on to reduce emissions, but we've got to tackle the actual core problem, is the burning of fossil fuels. So no amount of personal lifestyle changes and incentives and so on is going to address these fundamental existential threats. They need laws, regulations, and agreements about what we have to do in order to save the planet. And that, of course, means cooperation with the rest of the world, and especially with the two countries that the US is determined to go to war with, Russia and China. I'm still hearing an echo. I don't know if other people are hearing that.
Could people mute themselves when they're not when they're not speaking? I'm not going to mute everybody, but just could you mute yourself?
Thanks. So, in the book, I don't know how many of you have read the third section of the book or the summary, which has a lot of the maps and charts. But, as you know, the top carbon emitters are also the countries pointing nuclear weapons at each other. US, Russia, China, Europe, India. We have to work together. There's no way to solve either of these crises without working together at the international level. And of course, the whole theme of the book is about how we could solve both of these problems together by using the resources from one to address the other. We're spending enormous amounts of money on nuclear weapons, trillions, and they're earmarked funds going off into the indefinite future for building up the nuclear weapons stockpiles that we have at the moment. And we need that money to address climate. I mean, we know it's going to cost a lot of money to properly bring down emissions and make the transition off fossil fuels. It's not the only place the money could come from, but we could solve both at once by transferring that money. It's just such a no-brainer. And the same with all the other resources that we're wasting, especially the brain power. What I've tried to argue in the book is that we actually need the scientists and engineers and technicians that are currently designing more and more deadly weapons. We need those people to be designing solutions to, battery storage and transmission lines and, electric aviation and all these other things which we're still working on. We need our best minds working on this, and we're wasting that precious human resource on nuclear weapons. So transferring from one to the other is such an obvious solution. We have to find fair and equitable ways of doing that. Which, this is about jobs and about communities. We know that if we just suddenly stopped tomorrow and said, no more nuclear weapons, no more fossil fuels, there'd be a lot of people out of work, there'd be a lot of communities suffering, and there'd be people who can't afford to make those kinds of transitions. That's why we need laws and regulations and government action, and not just hope for the best and get people to do their own thing. So it requires action by the White House and Congress. We know in this country, we need the whole world working on this, but we certainly need this country, and especially when it comes to nuclear weapons. This country has led the way from the beginning of the Manhattan Project right through to today, developing every single new development and new technology relating to nuclear weapons, and insisting that these weapons are needed for our security. And unless we take the lead in the United States, we're not going to see progress in other countries. So the other way that these two issues are closely related to each other is that they're both being prevented from resolution by the same problem. And we know what that problem is, and it's the corporations. The largest military contractors and the largest fossil fuel companies have a stranglehold on our government. They pour millions of dollars into congressional re-election campaigns, lobbying, think tanks that produce, documents for and actual laws. One of the things I learned fairly recently was, these big corporations don't just lobby our members of Congress to pass certain laws. They actually write the laws. They provide interns for, fellows straight from corporations and from the Pentagon who work in the offices of Congress to draft laws, explain what has to be done from their point of view. And, these members of Congress don't have the capacity to even read some of these thousands of pages of laws that they have to pass. So these corporations have such a powerful influence on the way government operates, not just with fossil fuels and nuclear weapons, of course, but with everything else that we're struggling to get fixed in this country. But these corporations are absolutely key to solving these crises and protecting the planet. And we know who you are. These are the top nuclear weapons contractors, BAE Systems, Raytheon, L3 Harris, and so on. And these are the top fossil fuel companies: ExxonMobil, Koch brothers, Dutch Shell, and so on. These companies are literally making billions and billions of dollars, and they spend millions on influencing Congress. So they're getting, for their million, they get billions in the case of nuclear weapons companies, they get billions in contracts. That's like 1,000% return on their investment. It's a pretty good deal for them. And of course, the fossil fuel companies don't get direct benefits from the government, but they get enormous profits because of the policies that they push on the government and insist on. And this diagram, I'm pretty sure, is in the book. It's certainly in the summary. Looking at all the ways that the corporations influence, not just directly, but indirectly. They're influencing all of us every day. Drip, drip, drip. We're getting the propaganda. We're getting the framing of how these issues are discussed. It all comes down to the money that's flowing from these corporations, and that's where we have a chance to do something about it. So the last part of the book is about how we can use our influence as individuals and as members of communities and institutions, and how countries outside of the US can use their influence to put pressure on these companies. It's happened before many, many times through the anti-apartheid movements, through many, many other movements, but also through the nuclear weapons movement in the 1980s, when it was pressure on these companies that really had one of the major impacts in making the whole change that took place under the Reagan administration in the 1980s. So I look at all that in the book, but we are right now in the middle of enormous pressure being put on the fossil fuel companies. We would not be where we are today if it weren't for the fact that $40.5 trillion are being withheld from the fossil fuel industry globally. That's a huge amount of money, and they feel it and they know it, and we're seeing a backlash from it, and we're seeing, states like Oklahoma trying to stop people from divesting from fossil fuel companies, which just demonstrates the impact that it is having. We have a lot less going on so far with nuclear weapons divestment, but this is New York City. A couple of years ago, New York City Council voted to divest billions from their consolidated pension funds in New York City. It's a lot of money. They haven't done it yet, as far as we know, but they've committed to doing it. They voted to do it, and they're, the groups in New York City are pushing the powers that be to actually implement those divestment commitments. But this is a movement that's already going, and it's having huge impact. I'm particularly interested in the fact that both the nuclear weapons companies and the fossil fuel companies, almost all of them, engage in other products and activities. They make they don't make a lot of consumer products. Honeywell does, as you know, thermostats and so on. But we'll get into that. But they all make hospital equipment, because these companies want to be seen to be on the right side of history and doing the right things, saving lives. And these companies are responsible for the potential destruction of the planet. So we've got to convince medical profession and doctors and hospitals and so on to boycott these companies that are making medical equipment. That's Honeywell. Here's ExxonMobil. They're all trying to look good by making medical equipment, but they also make other products, and especially for larger and larger institutions like cities, these companies have investments in products that we can get cities and hospitals and faith communities to divest from or to boycott, and that's a huge power that we have over these companies. This is an example of, these are the nuclear-free zones from the 1980s. Now, a lot of these were just resolutions that said, we don't want nuclear weapons in our town. But many of them, and more of them at the time, were passing binding legislation, city ordinances and so on, which not only divested the city from nuclear weapons companies, but refused to allow city contracts with these companies. And that is where we have enormous power when it comes to cities, because these cities have multi-million-dollar contracts for electricity services, or school IT systems, libraries, police radios, for example, is a big one. And as I mentioned, hospitals and so on. They make roads and bridges and railway stations and airports. These companies are big players, and if we can get more and more cities in the United States to really step up the pressure, we can have an enormous influence on these companies, as they did, as I said, in the 1980s. But we have another tool, which you all know about, which is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And I want you to memorize this map. This is a map of the countries that are currently or in the process of joining this treaty. So the blue ones, I don't know how easily you can see the map on your screen, but I mean, the blue countries are in the treaty already. The green ones have signed it, but are in the process of ratifying it, but they will be in the treaty eventually. The yellow ones have voted consistently for other countries to sign this treaty and ratify it, but they haven't done so themselves yet. And that includes, as you can see, a lot of Middle Eastern countries. And then the orange ones are what we're really pinning our hopes on, because these are countries that have enormous public pressure on the governments to sign and join this treaty. And Germany and Spain, for example, have coalition governments right now who are committed to joining the treaty. Australia has a prime minister who's personally signed the ICANN pledge. His party supports signing the treaty. You know, we've got a lot of potential here. And if you just memorize this map to see the countries that we're talking about, every single company that makes nuclear weapons has operations in other countries besides the United States. They may make nuclear weapons for the United States, but they have operations, they have offices, they have suppliers, investors, all kinds of connections with these other companies. And as you can see, we'll just go back 1 second, have a quick look at the countries. And this one is Honeywell, for example, operating in 110 countries. Here's Airbus, operating in, does it say the number? I forget, but anyway, in quite a few countries. Here's another one, Thales, which is a French company making French nuclear weapons, but they're also operating in all these countries. So, you know, we have this enormous potential, and I describe in the book about Ireland, for example, which has passed a law making it not only illegal to have anything to do with nuclear weapons in Ireland, but the penalty is up to life in prison for having anything to do with nuclear weapons in Ireland. Now, if we can get more countries to pass laws like that, that is putting enormous pressure on these companies. And I just spent the last week in New York visiting UN missions to urge them to pass these laws, and we found out some more of them have already passed laws, like the one in Ireland. So we're on the way to getting this pressure. So on the left-hand side here, you see the pressure from treaties, countries, and laws that are passing laws, in the case of nuclear weapons at least, putting pressure on these companies. And on the other side are people, cities, states, and institutions, faith communities, colleges, universities, who can divest and put pressure on the companies on the other side. And that is putting a pincer movement, if you like, on these companies, these corporations, where we're pushing them to do something about both climate and nuclear weapons in order to get them to influence governments and pass legislation and get what we want to get out of them. So that's our strategy. That's the strategy that's in the book, in short. And we have all these ways in which the companies are vulnerable, which I go through in the book. I don't know if you want to spend time on each of these now, but you know, the one that I was just talking about is legislative risk, where a company is facing potential fines or even imprisonment in another country for the activities that they're engaged in. Now, the more we can do that, the more we can. Reputational risk is an obvious one. You know, we want to make these companies ashamed. Instead of proud that they're making medical equipment, they should be ashamed that they're contributing to these existential threats, and we've got to put pressure on them. And these all have financial implications for these companies as well as social ones. So we have a set of tools to put pressure, to have these effects on the companies. The three ones that I talk about are boycotting, divestment, and stigmatizing or shaming. And so that's our new BDS. We don't, you know, we can't, individual citizens and institutions can't sanction these companies in the way that, you know, countries can, but we can certainly stigmatize and shame them on social media and by taking our case to their shareholder meetings and all these kinds of things. And divestment and boycotting are such powerful tools, and between these three categories, we can put pressure on these companies, and we have to do that in order to save the planet. So Joanne mentioned our coalition, which has grown out of this book. You know, we now have about 60 members in our coalition of organizations around the country, some national ones and some statewide ones, including the Washington PSR, for example, and many local ones like Seattle Fellowship of Reconciliation down there. So these are organizations that want to work together to address these two existential threats. We've worked on lobbying members of Congress. We've written letters to President Biden. As I said, we've done work at the UN together, and now our big focus is on these companies. So just to finish off, this is not in the book. This is what you can do to be part of this in the coming months, because we have these 2 weeks of action coming up in September. The first one is the ICANN week of action on no money for nuclear weapons, and the following week is the global week of action on climate and peace and climate justice. So we're using those 2 weeks that are global action weeks to focus on these two sets of companies, the nuclear weapons companies and the fossil fuel companies. And I don't know if you can see this map, but we've had a volunteer identify over 600 locations for some of these companies. So there's a company near you for sure. You mentioned about the military bases and the Bangor nuclear submarine base and so on, which are definitely up there. But there are also these companies, and of course Boeing. I don't know where exactly Boeing is, but I know it's near you somewhere. But these companies, we want to draw attention to these companies by getting people to go to their nearest office or facility of some of these companies, and then combining that, getting that. There's things you can do, whether it's just standing there with signs, or this is Vicky actually on at our local L3 Harris plant in Massachusetts. I don't know if you can see the sign on the door, but we posted this. This corporation is engaged in activities prohibited by the Nuclear Ban Treaty, but we found there was already a notice on the door that says no weapons allowed. So that was their sign. But there are all kinds of activities you can do at these companies to draw attention, get pictures, and get into the media and so on. We also want people to write letters. This is our friend Darius Adamczyk, who's the CEO of Honeywell. He's had hundreds and hundreds of letters from people all over the country. We got people to write to say we're not going to buy any more Honeywell thermostats if you don't stop making nuclear weapons. And unfortunately, what they did was sell their thermostat division, which is not what we wanted, but it does indicate the kind of impact people can have around the country. We got to keep at it, Honeywell and all these other companies, and write directly to them, but also write to their boards, write to their, use social media. They're all on Facebook and Twitter and so on, trying to promote how great they are, and they need to hear from us. And then the third piece of our campaign in September is trying to get together with the students that are trying to divest their colleges from the exact same companies that are sending weapons to Israel right now. But building a stronger movement, pushing for divestment, pushing for boycotts and refusing of contracts by cities and so on, to really draw attention to these companies and make them feel the pressure, because that's our way of having an impact. So that's what I have for you in terms of slides, and I'll be happy to discuss or answer questions or whatever you want to do there.
Okay, first of all, I want to welcome 3 people that joined us in the meantime. Hardy joined us, and Hardy is a member of our OCAN, Olympia Coalition. He is a Chilean by birth and certainly has very deep roots in peace activities. And Kim happens to be my niece, or my husband's niece. So what? And her husband had run a oil company in Louisiana. And then Bob De La Strada has joined us, and Bob and Jean are both members of OCAN. So what's happening so far? And Carol Raucher has joined us, and she's also a member of the Westminster Church. So what we have here is our people representing organizations. We have OCAN here. We have our own Westminster Presbyterian Church that's here. We have members of other churches, the Lutheran Church here, and the Baha'i religion is here. Harry represents our Washington State group of nuclear abolition, who already has been doing protests against Boeing. Marilyn is part of the network of Peace Fellows, which is the Presbyterian network that's national. We really do have constituencies that can take actions. And so
Great.
one of the things that I was saying in the beginning was that I was going to ask you towards the end. First, I'll be quiet so that you can ask questions and respond. But I'm going to be asking, what next steps are you doing? I am extremely proud that you joined us today, but your joining us, I think, has a responsibility, since you have heard the passion of this man and the lifelong work that he has done. And how I got to know Timon is because his wife, Vicky, happened to join our class when we were teaching a class on nuclear weapons, when our OCAN group was teaching a class on nuclear weapons, and we reached out to 200 people. Well, ultimately, Vicky was one of them, and she told me about her love affair with her husband, and hey, that made our friendship grow. And so the connections are marvelous. And but let me stop for now. What questions or comments would you like to make to Timon at this point?
So I have a question. I have a question, if I could ask this, from the perspective of the Rachel Corrie Foundation. We work mainly on human rights for Palestinians. That's our focus. And of course, United States, China, there are large companies that both contribute to the carbon emissions that we need to fight and the nuclear weapons. United States, Russia, China have the most nuclear weapons, but Israel is a nuclear weapon state. What is happening in Gaza at the moment, and in general in Israel and Palestine over the years, is very much a resource issue. How do you separate that, and how do you address the large carbon emissions from huge states, but also recognize, but what do we do about the what's going on in the Middle East at the same time?
Yeah, well, what's going on in the Middle East right now is horrific and scary and of course devastating for the people there, especially the Palestinians in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, and the whole region is at risk. As you said, Israel has nuclear weapons. Iran, could get nuclear weapons. I mean, the whole situation is very, very dangerous, and there are lots of people working on that. I mean, I'm focusing on these two threats of nuclear weapons and climate because I don't want to lose track of that. They're not going away, and they're getting worse, and we have to address those. But at the same time, people are concerned about Gaza or other issues, gun violence, the election. There's so many things that people are concerned about, and you've got to choose your battles and and work on them. So I don't expect everybody to drop what they're doing and work on abolishing nuclear weapons, but somebody has to keep doing that. So that's my role. And of course, as you know, there are only 9 countries that have nuclear weapons. I mean, Israel's one of them. And actually, one of the really interesting things about, which is not in my book because I didn't know about it until recently, but I'm sure some of you know that there is the Glenn Amendment. Have you heard about that? There was an amendment by John Glenn in the Senate back in the 60s or 70s, which says that the U.S. cannot send any military aid to a country that has nuclear weapons outside of the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Wow.
And Israel is
Yes.
not in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Under U.S. law, we are not allowed to send weapons to Israel. Now, the thing about it is that Israel pretends that they don't have nuclear weapons. And I was always confused about that. Like, why do they pretend they don't have nuclear weapons? And the US joins in that pretense, by the way. They pretend that Israel doesn't have nuclear weapons, and they've never officially sort of admitted it. And that is because of this Glenn Amendment. It's because if they admit that Israel has nuclear weapons, the US cannot legally send them military aid. So I think that that's that's one of the angles that connects the issue with Gaza right now and military weapons going to Israel and so on, that connects directly with the nuclear issue. So that's one contribution I would make. But as I said, there are many people concerned about Gaza right now, which I'm very glad about. I'm so excited that the students are in the streets and protesting, and I hope that's going to start up again very soon when they go back to college. Until we get this over, it's terrible what's happening there.
And we have heard that there are Students for Disarmament groups that have started up. Have you heard about those? They started
Yeah.
in California and they're at the college level, and we're going to have a representative in Ground Zero speaking on August 4th at the high school level.
I know her very well, Maria. Yeah,
Really?
Maria was with us. We worked with Maria on our state bill in Massachusetts. She came and she brought 30 high school students to the State House to lobby for our state commission on nuclear weapons and climate. And she came down to Washington, D.C. with us, and we lobbied members of Congress. So yeah, we know Maria, and I'm very glad she's going to go to Ground Zero, and you'll meet her.
Wonderful. Yeah, I just heard about it and I got all excited. I wondered if, okay, I'm sorry. Is there any other questions here? Okay, Peter?
I was wondering if you could put up that screen again that had the coming events in September, so that I could maybe take a picture of it or something.
Yeah, I can send it to you. I mean, wait, let's see.
This is also being recorded, Peter, so you could actually
That's
play the
true.
recording if it doesn't work. Yeah,
That.
yeah.
So it's September 16th to 22nd, and September 23rd to 29th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, you could, just remembering what people could do, even if you were to have a dinner party and talked about the issue with your friends, right?
Yep.
I mean, it could be as simple as that. If you can program something, all the better, if it might reach more people. But I mean, there are so many ways. I used to have a friend, she used to, and she worked on the nuclear freeze and she worked on the special session. She used to talk to people next on the train. She was on the train. She just started a conversation. We could do the same thing. There are all kinds of ways that you could spread the news, and we need to spread the news. Any other questions?
Excuse me, Bill, could you silence some of the people who aren't silenced? Getting a lot of feedback here.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
not going to mute
Michael
everybody,
has his-
but if you could mute yourself unless you have questions, that would be helpful.
Michael, you're yeah, but you have to unmute yourself. You're muted. Yeah, okay.
No, that's okay. Well, Tim, I wanted to encourage you to take a look at the Faroe Islands in the North Atlantic. They are making extraordinary efforts to eliminate fossil fuel production of electricity. So they have giant windmills. They've got tidal currents that they are accessing and working with. They've got solar. They've got hydropower, and they have no military. It's against the law to have a handgun in the Faroe Islands. So if you show up with a handgun, you'll find yourself in a Danish prison very quickly. But anyway, I would just encourage you to take a look at and to see actually, here's a country that the parliament decided we are going to do something about climate change, and we are going to eliminate of the fossil fuel consumption here in the islands. And they recognized that it was a very, very expensive to use fossil fuels. And now they've just, it's amazing to see the big windmills now. So anyway, I encourage you, Faroe Islands,
Got
Faroe
it.
Islands.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thanks.
Take care.
And I
That's
think
great
you cited the work that Denmark has done, because the Faroe Islands are under the auspices of Denmark. So he's,
Not really. It's
okay,
the reason that they're not independent is because the United States stepped in and said, oh, wait a minute, they've got so many good ports there. They might want to allow the Russians to put their submarines there. We can't allow that. So Denmark, take away their independence because they're not independent. They're going to be under you. So we can control you.
Yeah,
I'd
no, the
like to-
Faroes are a great example, and there are many others. I mean, you know, including countries that don't have military and countries that are 100% dependent on alternative sources of electricity by now. And you know, we've got a long way to go, and that's the problem. I mean, it's mostly small countries that are taking the lead, and we need, as I said, U.S., China, Russia, India, you know. But yes, it's a great examples. Great.
yeah.
I'd like to mention something about your observation that in the business, older people will complain about nuclear weapons, and younger people will be very enthusiastic about controlling the environment. I think that attributes itself to the same thing we found when we were giving our course, that we've had a devil of a time drumming up interest among the young. I don't think they lived through our young period. They didn't grow up with the bombs, with the threats and all that. What they grew up with was limited wars that didn't break out and blast everyone with everything they could possibly do. So their notion of war may be subconsciously that they're small and contained, whereas climate affects the whole globe. That may be enough to excite them and say, don't take my future from me, even if it takes a generation, as opposed to bombs, which can take our future from us overnight.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons we're building this coalition between climate activists and nuclear activists, because it's also bringing the two generations together, and you know, mobilizing the youth energy and so on. But I do want to say this is a U.S. phenomenon, because in the rest of the world, and Joanne knows from ICANN meetings and so on, I mean, it is young people taking the lead in the rest of the world on the nuclear issue. In countries like Mongolia and Kazakhstan and Peru and Bolivia and, you know, all these countries all over the place, it's young people who also see the danger of the nuclear threat, which is very inspiring to me, because as you say, in this country, it's mostly older generation that really takes that issue, but globally we got some allies.
And they have a range of international lawyers who have just gotten their degrees, and they're all young and they're working for ICANN because it's so exciting. Tim, and I wonder if you could, because we're talking about divestment, how do you, as an individual, what action can you take to divest as an individual? I mean, you know,
Joanne, I want to remind you that Bob or Jean has their hand up.
I'm sorry, yes. Let's ask, Jean, what's your question or comment?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I was part of the Social Concerns Committee at my Lutheran church, and we had an interim pastor, and he welcomed the issue of nuclear weapons on our program. Since that time, we've gotten another pastor, and they basically tell me that we need nuclear weapons as a defense against the other countries that have them, and then also that we have a lot of military people in our church who who would take offense at this issue. And then the kind of their concluding statement was, "Now is not the time." So do you have any kind of gut level reaction to that type of thinking?
Well, I mean, first of all, you're talking about a church, and you know, I mean, you can't tell a pastor, what that they're wrong, but they are. I mean, this is not about. I mean, Christianity is not about using weapons that threaten the entire planet and kill millions of people. I mean, let's try to get it back to that level. And the whole idea, I mean, I've, back in the 1980s, I was working on this issue in England, and, we had a bishop who was on our side. It was fantastic, who was part of our, came to these military bases and would speak up and so on. But then we had another bishop who said that his life had been saved from fighting in Japan at the end of the war because of that bomb, and he was, grateful and all the rest of it. But, towards the end of his life, he also changed. Wait just a second. So, I mean, I wouldn't accept that answer myself. I mean, you just have to keep having that conversation and hoping that people will think, in other ways. I mean, that's where, how you have these conversations is another whole conversation.
Well, in that same moment, basically, what I said, and I'll have to make a longer response, but I said, if the church can't stand up for this, who can?
Yeah, no, that's a great response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And,
Okay.
and to get back to your,
Yeah, my question about me as an individual, what can I do? I've already tried doing something that I can share, but I want to hear your response.
well, there's so many things as you said. I mean, in
So
terms of
with regard to divestment.
yeah. So it depends on your circumstances, of course. We have a divestment advisor here in Massachusetts. He's willing to help anybody who has personal investments themselves to get them out of the funds that are invested in nuclear weapons or fossil fuels or any other. I mean, he does ethical investment, and there are many ways that you can transfer to other funds. If you have a pension or an annuity, or it gets complicated dealing with these different kinds of funds that are held, that are mixed funds, but it's all possible with some help. And then of course there's your bank accounts where you keep your money, where your your insurance companies that you use. All of these are ways of at the very least engaging with your bank or your whoever and saying, like, where is my money going? What are you investing in? What's your connection? Writing these letters is so important. The writing to the companies, but also to banks, to financial institutions, pension funds, and saying, we don't want our money being used for nuclear weapons or fossil fuels. I don't know if that's really answering your question.
That's a huge help, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was told that you start the conversation in your bank. And they don't know. They have no idea, but the fact that you want an answer starts the ball rolling, because they
and the
can
more
give you an
people who
answer
do
and they
this,
have to look into it, yeah.
yeah,
And there is, Don't Bang on the Bomb. There are resources, and Code Pink. There are resources that itemize banks that do invest in nuclear weapons. It turns out one I go to does, and I have to make sure that I have questioned them over and over again. Is my money in that part of, so there are those actions. I said that I wanted to get from people commitments. And I'm going to ask if anybody wants to start the ball rolling as to a commitment that they feel they want to make. It could be as small as, I'll go talk to my bank in the morning. Jim? You're muted.
That's the new, take it over. If you're looking for a big ego to make a lot of noise and get all the nations of the world up on this, just in terms of information and action, I'm almost tempted to say, turn it over to the comedians, because the serious people of this world, the ones we would have expected to know about danger and risk, are not doing anything at all. So let's give it to the clowns and see how much they can stir up, because the president is not going to sign any treaty unless he has a groundswell of popular opinion to back him up. Likewise, all the senators, we're going to have somebody, oh, they're begging me to take this position, so I'll have to join them. And we haven't got that much time to work with. The young
Remember the
people,
Pope?
Your commitment is to do some stand-up comedy?
I'm ready to go back to the stage, yes.
Well, the Pope has invited and already had a meeting they held a meeting, I think a couple weeks ago, because Steve Colbert was talking about, my God, the Pope invited us to the Vatican. So he's already met with it. And you know, the Pope was one of the speakers who was very, very significant in getting the treaty passed. So it didn't make the news that he was mentioning the treaty, but I can't believe him not mentioning the treaty. Anyway, okay, anyone else want to, before I call on you, anybody else wants to volunteer with your next step?
I'll go talk to I told this to Joanne a couple of months ago. I was going to go talk to my bank, and see where they stand. And my my mom was going to do the same. We talked about that the other day, actually.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, who's next?
I'm excited to support Students for Nuclear Disarmament. I'm going to be tabling with one of the students who's out here in Washington State in a few days, and I'm also met with some of the leadership. If we have time, I would be interested to hear from Tim and or anyone else. What would be the best way to learn about the youth-led movements against nuclear weapons in other countries, and how we can learn from the way that they're engaging young people? But only if we have time for that question.
Tim, why don't you respond to that now?
Do we have time? Okay. Well, joining the Students for Nuclear Disarmament would be a great connection. ICANN does have training academies periodically. They have meetings, of young people. There's a whole group out right now in Geneva for the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And there's funding for young people to go to these things and learn, at these UN meetings. There's a meeting coming up in Kazakhstan in August, and there's going to be the things at the UN in September and October, and then there's going to be the next meeting of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons next March. So those are all times when you can meet up with lots of young people that are working on this. And there's, as I said, there's other ICANN events in the meantime. I don't know if Joanne has other suggestions.
Okay, well, yeah, we have a bunch of speakers that we can bring in. We have OCAN, and there are a lot of people there that can be able to speak one-on-one with questions and guide them. So, yeah, there are these local resources. Okay, who else wants to say their next step?
I will
Okay, Ron?
speak on that. I am not sure that the public at large has ever been exposed to information on these issues
Oh, we
except
haven't.
from the viewpoint of someone grinding an axe or someone promoting themselves or their company or their budget. I am going to start talking with my family and my 2 boys in a subtle but persistent way to consider these things and become aware of the issues. Because the thing that I see, to have this great swell of support, there's a lot of people out there who going through their daily lives just too busy and swamped with just
Mhm.
making a living and taking care of their families.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of inertia to overcome. But I think awareness in the public at large is needs to be addressed. The other thing I'm going to do is, as the Christian education elder at Westminster Presbyterian Church of Olympia, I will continue to give the floor to Joanne and Jim as frequently as they requested, and to continue that. It's trying to make that a continued effort in our programs at the church to educate our congregation. So those are the 2 things that I'm sensing I can do, and
Okay,
spread
thank
the
you.
word.
Anyone else?
So this is Peter. I will probably be looking at political groups to see which one I can join and try and make contributions to help restrict corporation lobbying and or provide competing lobbyists at various levels of government and moving to restrict corporate contributions and revolving door policies with government entities. I'll be looking at divesting from the corporations that support nuclear weapons. And one of the things that we mentioned in an earlier meeting, I'll probably be looking at whether it's possible to invest in vortex bladeless wind turbines. So this is a company in Spain that's developing technology that doesn't involve the bladed windmills, but instead has a column that creates vortexes and moves back and forth. And this actually reduces moving parts and theoretically should be better for generating electric power from wind. We'll see how that technology develops, but that's something I'd like to support.
Wonderful. Thank you. I just put in the chat 2 organizations that help individuals with divestment information. So you can just log on to them. They have very, very good websites and information. Who's next? Okay, yes, the Delastratas.
Go ahead.
I work with the Fellowship of Reconciliation's youth program, My Hero Peace Fellowship. And in working with them, I would like to give them the information about student-led disarmament groups that they might find out more about, because we certainly invite them to our events, but that is not necessarily something they want to do. And then we are having the Golden Rule, the BSW Peace boat visiting in Olympia in the middle of August, and I would like to try to use that as an opportunity to get more information to particularly the young people about disarmament and abolition of nuclear weapons.
Thank you.
Yeah. My thoughts are I'm going to craft a comprehensive letter to my pastor and my congregation and kind of confront them with their objections and try to create some space around those things so that they can see that those are not good answers.
Thank you.
I see Marilyn's hand, and then I want to remind people that we're at 6 o'clock, and I think that will end it. So, Marilyn, do you have a question? And
Yeah, but Marilyn was going to say something.
yes,
Marilyn?
I guess I asked if Marilyn had anything.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say I'm profoundly grateful for this book, and thank you, Tim, and this discussion. Thank you so much. It puts together quite a toolkit for activists, and I'm really inspired. Joanne has joined the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship's Peace Church Working Group, and what we're doing is we're kind of committing to focus on this 80th year that is beginning of the use of nuclear weapons and with programming. And so I'm getting inspired with some ideas, but I will start by inviting you all. Our first action, it'll be the first thing we've done in quite a while on nuclear weapons, will be on August 8th, a commemoration, a Zoom meeting for Hiroshima, Nagasaki. And it'll be at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And if you go to presbypeacefellowship.org, you can find under events, you can find a link to register for that. You need to, there's no charge, but you need to register in order to be sent the Zoom link.
And I think, Tim, and you know Ward Wilson, he's going to be working on that.
Great, yep.
Okay, anybody left?
No,
Eddie, do you want to say something?
I think we should stop here, Joanne.
Do you want to? Okay. Well, anyway, thank you all. I'm sorry this is ending, because I think this is just the beginning. So maybe we'll try to schedule another, I don't know, another invitation down the road. And we can just check how we're doing with what our efforts have been. But I love you all, and I wish you Godspeed to all of you.
Thank you,
Thanks
Joanne.
for coming.